Thank you, Josh. Yeah, he tried to forget about me, y'all. I reminded him. Okay, yeah, so first of all, super honored to be here. I love being able to share with everybody. This is like something that I'm super, super passionate about, right? And I want to tell you guys a little bit of story about kind of like where we were and how we got where we are. But like Josh said, we live off the grid. So we actually live on the Georgia side. We're not in Tennessee, we're on the Georgia side. But we bought about 26 acres of land, and we have been living out there for a couple years now, and really, really working towards the self-sufficiency life. Just being 100% self-reliant, growing a lot of our own food, being able to like truly want to live off the land and teach our kids to do the same thing. That's really what it was about for us. It's like here in our mid-30s, when we were like, oh my gosh, the world's falling apart. We really need to go work on like our off-grid dream that we've been having for, you know, a decade or more. And then realizing that we were like scrambling around trying to learn these skills, like the forgotten ways of the past. That's what we talk about. So we run a ministry out there, and it's called Forgotten Ways Ministry or Forgotten Ways PMA. And we really talk about what it's all about is like helping the future generations not have to go and scramble to learn those skills, but rather grow up learning them and knowing them so that they can learn and live off the land as they grow up, because our kids are our future, right? Like our kids are the ones that are gonna have to know a lot of this stuff in order to keep us moving forward. I mean, really, truly, I think the best way that we can protect our future is to just go back just a few steps back into the past, and that's really what it's about. So out there on our land, we have a pretty cool project out there. We're building a castle, like legit a castle. It's pretty epic. And not like this big castle, like this big, you know, like as in like this massive, you know, structure, but more of like a castle. Like when I think of it, I think of like protection. I think of it like, you know, like again, like more like back in the past of like what it's going to be like. And we're doing a lot of, like the turrets of our castle are made with grain silos. So it's just kind of utilizing materials that already, well, we didn't like make them or anything, but we found them, right? They were no longer being used, and we're like, hey, we'll put those to use, and we'll make those the turrets of our castle. And the back part of our castle is going to be made with hempcrete, which is a really sustainable material, and it's fire resistant, pest resistant, mold resistant, which is really huge when we're talking about being in the South. And so we're going to be using hemp to build the castle, and I don't know, we have a lot of really cool things that we're doing out there. My husband's really into like blacksmithing, so making a lot of our own tools, actually milling some of the wood that we're using to put up in the castle that we're building, which is pretty epic as well, but you know, of course that takes a long time. So the project is gonna be like, you know, we know that this is like a project that's gonna take a long time, but we're really excited about it because as we're doing it, we are learning, and like I said, we're able to teach our kids along the way. So we do have two little girls that are 11 and 8 years old. So anyways, we did buy our land about 2 years ago, and sometimes I look around and I think to myself like, oh my gosh, everything is going like so slow. Right? Like I just feel like it's going really slow. But then sometimes I look around and I think to myself like, holy crap, like we've actually done a lot in 2 years. And you know, to take raw land and turn it into like a functioning off-grid homestead, like it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. And I'm gonna talk a little bit about that today. Just kind of like some of the stuff that goes into that, self-sufficiency, and also kind of like why 100% full self-sufficiency is actually going to be like really, really, really hard, and probably most people in the world aren't ever really going to be able to get to that level. And so we're going to talk a little bit about community and building community and what that means as well. So let me back up and just tell you a little bit about us first so you know kind of where we were. In 2011, my husband joined the military, and we lived a life like 100% completely opposite of the life that we live right now. Like I like to think of ourselves like we're pretty free right now. We were like not free at all back then. Literally told how he had to dress, what he had to look like, how, you know, where we had to live. Like all of those things were decided for him, and ultimately like decided for me too, because I married him and was told where I had to go and what I had to do as well. So we were like really not in alignment with that life. So we decided after he would get out of his 6-year contract, we were going to like get out of the military, and we were going to find a way to be able to never have to work for anybody else ever again. Never have to take orders from anyone else ever again. And we didn't really have it all figured out. Like, we never really do. We like to jump into things and just like figure it out as we go. But we went for it anyways, and the thing is that if you want it bad enough, you will find a way to make it happen. And that's exactly what we did. So in 2017, we sold everything that we owned, we bought an RV. That's when he got out. We bought an RV and we started traveling. So I was just talking to Jeff. Where's Jeff? Oh, you're right here. And he's like, hey, I follow you on social media. You're always all over the place traveling. And I'm like, I know. Like, travel was like a really, really big part of our life. And still, to this day, is. But in 2017, that's when it really started. We bought an RV, we sold everything, and we like took off. We started in the US. We were like, let's travel the US for a little bit and see where this is gonna take us. Like, we felt free, right? Like, we didn't have the man telling us like what we had to do anymore and all of that stuff, right? But then it actually turned more into wanting to go a little bit more out of the US. We started traveling internationally. The first time that we actually lived off-grid was when we purchased land in South America. And we bought about 5 acres, and we were like, all right, we're gonna go try this off-grid thing, because that was always like a dream of ours. Like, we always wanted to live off the land. I was really big into like growing food. Even when we lived in like a cookie cutter neighborhood, when I could like reach out and touch my neighbor's house, we had this tiny little yard. But even in that tiny little yard, like, we grew so much food. We had like cantaloupes in the front that were like overgrowing in the sidewalks. We had pomegranates and apple trees and bushes and berries, and like we just grew so much food all the time. And so like it was like a really big thing where I was like, I want to be able to grow food, but I also want to travel. How can I do both? At one point, we even had in our RV, my husband like built me a little greenhouse, and we're like traveling down the road like with the greenhouse on top of the RV, because I'm like, how can I combine like my passions, like travel the world and grow food? But anyways, we decided we were going to go and buy land in South America, because I'm like, here, we get to travel and we can explore another country, but we can still have land and we can still grow and we can still do all the things that we wanted to do. So that was the first time we ever really experienced off-grid living and setting up some of these systems and like really, really, truly like learning what it was like to live off the grid. Learning what it was like to live off the land, and the first time that we ever really truly like homesteaded. Got some chickens, like did all that stuff. So, but anyways, like I said, really, really love to travel. I was too in love with all the places I'd ever been, and so that didn't last long, and we began to travel even more. Then COVID hit. We were traveling full time for about 4 years. We lived in a camper when we were stateside, and then we'd get up and we'd go travel. And then we'd come back to the States, and we'd live in the camper for a little bit, and then we'd go travel. And then we realized that we were really not able to do that as easily. We could have still done it, right? We could have done whatever we wanted during COVID, but it wasn't going to be as easy for us. And we also were like, we saw where it was going, like pretty quickly. So we're like, now is our time. It's actually kind of crazy because we were in China, in Beijing, in December 2019. The first case of COVID was November 2019 in Beijing. And we were like, flew in. And we flew in from Cambodia, and as we were booking our flights, we had all these pop-ups popping up, and like at the time I thought like nothing of it. It was like, are you sure you want to go to this country with coronavirus? And I'm like, oh, sure, whatever, I don't care, coronavirus, Literally like skimmed like 2 articles. And then by the time we got back to the States and we looked back at what it turned into, we're like, oh my gosh, we were like there. And my husband was like, delete all of your pictures of your phone, they're gonna say we're patient 0. We're joking, but it was so funny. So that kind of like, it didn't really put a stop to our travels. We still traveled throughout COVID, and we still did a lot of that. But it definitely changed the game for us because we didn't have a home base. We literally lived in a camper, and we didn't really have anywhere that we could call home. So that's when we were like, all right, it's time to buy our land, right? We're like, the world's going to crap. Guess I better go find, camp out in the base of a mountain and really, really start to try to live off the land. Sounds like a really great idea, right? Anyone else ever feel the need to be self-sufficient and go live off the land? I figured this was the group. So we bought some raw land. We already had a camper. We parked it out there. We set up some solar panels, battery banks, all that stuff. Set up a way to pump water from the creek and filter it. And then we figured out how to dispose of our waste. And that was our off-grid journey. It's really that simple when you're looking at off-grid living. It's like off-grid living at the very core of it is like removing yourself from public utilities, which is going to be power, water, and your waste for the most part. But of course there's a lot more to it than that, right? So we need to learn how to grow our own food. So we planted our orchard, set up the pasture for the cows, set up the forest for the pigs, let the chickens run free, all that good stuff too. So we had our homestead journey, we had our off-grid journey, and we were kind of on this path, right? Wasn't perfect, still isn't, but we didn't really wait until we had it all figured out before we started. Otherwise, we would have never started. I always tell people that like ready is a lie. Like you're never gonna be ready to jump into the things that you need to do. Like we jumped in and we're figuring it out as we go. And that's okay because part of the learning experience comes from the action that you're taking. And so that's another big thing. If you go away from, one thing that you take away from this talk, at least, it's going to be like the action is where you're going to learn everything that you need to learn about what it is that you need to do in your life. Our plans are still literally changing by the day. Ryan drew our castle plans out probably 5 times, 6 times, 10 times, and it keeps changing, and that's okay, right? Because we have the time that to do what we want to do, but just know that you don't have to have it all figured out before you go and you do it. But I do hear people all the time, especially people that don't really know me, follow me online or something like that, and they'll say oh wow, this is so inspiring, what you guys are building is so cool, and then the sentence comes, I would that if I could. And I'm like, no. Let's correct that. You would do that you could do that if you just would. Anybody can do anything that they want to do. You just have to do it. Like I said, it's the action of taking if anybody's sitting out there dreaming about oh, one day I wish I can, or what, you can. It's just all about getting up and taking the steps that you need to take in order to live the life that you want to live. And there's a really good quote from an author, Zig Ziglar. He says, you don't have to be great to start, but you do have to start to be great, right? And he is 100% right. You don't have to jump into everything at one time, but you do have to jump. If you want to make big strides towards relying less on others and more on yourself and on your land. So the best time to do all this might have been 10 years ago, but the second best time is right now, right? It's never too late to start doing and living the life that you want to live. So this is, if you haven't started yet, start now. That's the other thing I want you to take away from that, is start now. So I really wanted to break down self-sufficiency for you guys a bit and see, and just kind of ask you guys, just get a little interactive, and that's what this board here is for. I'm curious, when you think of self-sufficiency, what is it that comes to mind when you think of self-sufficiency? What does it mean to you?
No debt.
What was that?
No debt.
No debt, okay. Anybody else? Okay. Anybody else? Independence? Anybody else?
Water, energy,
Water. Okay. Water, yep. Energy, okay. What did you say, waste? What else? Privacy? Privacy. What's that? Autonomy? Oh gosh, I don't know how to spell that.
freedom to make better choices.
Making better choices?
Yes.
Just having choices. What else? What was that? Health, okay. I'm like waiting for something specific that no one said. Food! Okay. I'm like, no one said food. Shelter, okay. Brad?
I think a big part of it is the way I'm learning to look at it is if the economic system that we currently have isn't working, does that mean my life is shut down? If the answer is yes, I'm not self-sufficient.
Okay. So not being able to survive with the economy
You have
shuts
to be
down.
able to survive outside the current economic system.
Okay. The economic system. Okay. That's awesome. Okay, does anyone else have anything they want to add? Oh. What was that? Okay, closer to nature. Yes. Yes, that's good. For those that didn't hear, she said being able to fix things, basically, like if a car breaks down, you're not self-sufficient if you can't fix that broken car. Being closer to nature. Okay, I like that too. Awesome. Very cool. Okay, so I think that all of these obviously are really great options or really great things that come to mind when you think about being self-sufficient. But what I want to talk about is that there's actually like different levels. I don't know if levels is really the right word for it, but like different like stages maybe of like being self-sufficient, and that the majority of people in this world aren't ever really going to be fully self-sufficient. Exactly for the things of what you just said, right? Like if your car breaks, like are you really gonna be able to fix it? Are you gonna be able to make a new car? Are you gonna be able to do, there's so many things that like, that are just so far out there that like most people that are really going for a fully self-sufficient life aren't really ever gonna get there. Even people in this room that are like really going hard for it, right? But we all can begin working on some of the things, and that's kind of where I wanna go with the rest of the talk for the rest of today. So I want to give you steps towards working your way in the direction of more self-reliance, and also helping you understand some areas that you might want to look for as far as looking for support in your community. Because what this is all going to come back to is our community. What this is all going to come back to is that none of us are really going to be able to do this on our own. I know when we first bought our land, I had so many people reach out to us, and they were like, are you going to have a community? Are you going to have people out there and living with you? And I'm like, no, like absolutely not. I had experiences with living in communities a couple of different times where we lived with multiple families on the same property, and I had really bad experiences with it, and I was like absolutely 100% like no. But what I realized is that that doesn't necessarily have to be a community. Community can be so much more, and we already have a community. What Josh has put together as far as like the Agora Club and the meetups that we do, and how, you know, so many people in this room have even came together and like showed up to help support other people. Like Kenton was talking about his people and like their conviction of really just wanting to help each other. That's really what community is all about, and we already have access to that. So although we can still work towards some of the skills that we need to acquire in order to be more self-sufficient, just keep in mind that like really in order to be fully self-sufficient, like most of us are never going to get there. And that's okay, because we don't need to get there as long as we have each other. And as long as we have the willingness and the desire to be able to help each other. So I want to break down a couple of the major ones here. Food. I thought that was going to be like the first thing y'all said, by the way, and it wasn't. But I want to go into like, just to break it down and show you guys like how these different levels or stages of self-sufficiency could look for people who maybe haven't really thought that far into it yet. So the first stage could be like, how many of you guys grow food already? Have like a garden? Okay, I've seen like half of you guys. Okay, that's awesome. And I think that most of the time when you have a garden, when you first start out at least, are any of you guys like new to gardening? Okay, so most of the time when you first start out, you're like learning all this new stuff, you're kind of learning like what to plant, when to plant, maybe learning like certain things that you can plant with each other that go better with each other, like companion planting and crop rotation, like Kenton talked about a little bit. Like those are really, really important things to learn. Irrigation systems, where to plant as far as the sun goes, and all that stuff in your garden. And this is like one of the first steps of growing food. Like it's really not that hard to grow food, right? Everybody can do it. We really can. But we go to this next stage of like providing food for your family, and it's like, well, do you grow enough food? Like what percentage of food for your family do you actually grow that you can provide for your family? You know, do you provide 20% of your food? 30%, 50%, 80%? Like really, if you want to be self-sufficient and you want to have acquire some of these skills to really provide for your family, like you really have to start growing either a lot of food or get really good at storing your food and get really good at, you know, maybe canning. I think Kenton mentioned a little bit about canning a little bit, and just storing different ways, dehydrating, freezing, freeze drying, fermenting. That's one of my favorite ways to store food. That one can get a little tricky, but so, you know, knowing that like growing food is actually like a skill that everybody can do, but it's like taking that one step further if you really want to be self-sufficient and actually being able to provide a lot of food for your family, and that does make it a little bit more difficult, which is why it's so important to start now. Because you have to start before you can gain the skills that you will need in order to continue growing food for your entire family for the year, and not just the year, but for the rest of your life, if you really want to be self-sufficient. Succession planning is another step. This is something I'm really, really working on. You guys grow a lot of food, then you understand that like you'll plant everything, you get really excited, the spring comes, and you're like, yeah, like everything goes in the ground, and then everything comes up at the same time, and then you're like, whoa. You have to process the food, and there's only so much food that you can eat fresh, right? And then you have to figure out ways to preserve that food, and it's like a full-time job. So that's why a lot of people, I think, can't do it. the way that our society is set up, because most people still have jobs. Most people still have to take, 8 hours a day to go to work or go do something else, and like really, truly, like it can be a full-time job trying to, really process like all of the food that you're growing if you're trying to grow enough food to be self-sufficient for your entire family. And if you're trying to give back to your community as well in big ways. It's also very overwhelming and not sustainable as far as like energy-wise goes for one person to be able to do all that. So when you learn about succession, you learn how to spread it out, and you learn how to make everything not necessarily come, rolling in at the same time. And that is definitely something that I'm like not nailing right now. But it's something that takes time and skills to be able to learn, right? Another thing with growing food, it's like saving seeds. It's like that's like a really big thing, like hoarding seeds for like more than a few years, like drastically reduces the germination rate. So it's better to do that than not have any seeds at all, don't get me wrong. But like learning how to save your own seeds and be able to have it year after year after year, like this is a process. And it's like different for every single plant. And there's a lot that you need to know, and you have to realize that this is like a big aspect of growing food. So I'm just trying to break down some of these main topics so you guys can see what I'm talking about when I talk about like most people aren't really ever going to be fully self-sufficient. This is why we get to lean on our community, because there's so much that goes into this that most people don't even think about. And they're like, oh, you have a garden, I grow food. And it's like, great, but did you think about all this other stuff? And if you really want to get to that point where you're completely sufficient, then these are things that you're going to have to start thinking about. Also, building soil. That's another big thing for long-term success. Your crop is really only going to be as healthy as your soil. So healthy soil equals nutrient-dense plant. So that's another big important thing. Then we have animals. You guys have animals here? Anybody have animals? Josh, you guys have animals? Okay, cool. Yeah, that's another big part of homesteading. For us, my family and I, like we decided that like we're totally fine. Like if our garden doesn't produce, as long as our orchard does well and our animals do fine, we're totally cool because we can eat meat and fruit and we can live off of that. I like to have a garden. I like to have other things coming up, but like we're fine. Like if our garden just like really like just doesn't work out well one year, like we're totally fine because we have our animals and our orchard. But when it comes to animals, like there's a lot that goes into that too, right? And so many people I know that have laying hens, and this is amazing, and it's super easy, and like anybody can do it. But then it comes into like raising other animals, like meat birds, turkeys, cows, pigs, rabbits, like all these other things. Just a little bit more. You gotta have some land. You gotta have some sort of fencing. You gotta have, maybe you'll invest in some sort of protection for your livestock. There's more stuff that goes into it when you start getting into like some of the bigger animals. And then of course there's butchering. And I know a lot of homesteaders that are really into raising their own animals, but then they outsource the butchering process. And really, if you're going to be self-sufficient, you've got to learn how to do that yourself as well. And that's a really, really big part and one of the skills that you would want to develop if you're looking towards living the self-sufficient life. And I remember when we first did our animals, our first pigs, we actually did it by accident because during COVID, like all of these like processing plants were like shutting down, and they're like, we're not taking any more animals. And me and Ryan were like, what are we going to do? So we got on YouTube, right, and we watched, but like no YouTube video that you watch is going to prepare you for like the actual step of like doing the thing, right? Which is why I'm saying everything that you're going to do in your life is going to be about taking the action and learning from just doing. So like you just need to get out there and you just need to do it, right? But if you eat meat, this is the ultimate way to be, self-sufficient. If you're planning on eating in the animal category, if you're planning on eating animals, like learning how to kill it, gut it, cut it up the way you like it, and then packaging up to store it too. So that's another thing when you talk about being self-sufficient is energy. What are you going to do as far as energy goes? There's different levels and stages of that as well, How many of you guys have like, does anyone live off-grid here? You don't count. Anyone else? Oh, you live, okay, awesome. Yeah, so there's, Kenton raised his hand. So yeah, there's different, for power, like there's different, how many of you guys actually have like backup, like prepared, like a backup plan, like a generator in case anything like emergencies happen? Okay, yeah, lots of people that have like some backup power, and that usually I think it's like a really good, stage, I guess if you would say stages of self-sufficiency. And then, I think another thing that people work towards is like getting some sort of, maybe like some deep freezers or a certain appliance or a certain something like all on some sort of backup energy so that you're like providing a little bit more, you're offsetting what you're using from the grid, but you're kind of like setting yourself up a little bit more. And then of course being able to produce all of your power. And that's like another stage, another step to get towards that. If you really want to be unplugged and be self-sufficient, then you have to come up with a way to produce all of your own energy, right? And then having different types of energy sources, right? Because what if the sun, what if you have like a super cloudy, what if you're just set up on solar and then it's like really cloudy for like a whole week and you have a whole bunch of storms? You're gonna need to have some extra ways to produce power, hydroelectric maybe, or wind, or something like that. So like these are all like different stages. Like if you really wanna be self-sufficient, you're gonna have to go down all these paths and think about like, anybody could probably power their house for a couple days if there's a storm, but how many people could power their house for an entire year or longer if they really want to be self-sufficient? That's just something that we have to think about. The last thing I want to talk about was just water. Of course, like storing water. How are we doing over here? Okay, storing water, backup drink. How many of you guys have backup supplies in case like another emergency situation? Maybe you're storing some water bottles, in whatever way. So that's like a really good first stage of being prepared. But ultimately you're going to want to find a way to collect some water. Whether you're doing it from rain, whether you're going to dig a pond on your property, whether you're going to have a stream or buy land with a stream, or something like that where you're actually having access to water and you're able to filter it yourself. That's a really big thing too. Because if you have water, like everybody here should know water is life. It's not just about ourselves, but it's about our animals too. If we're relying on our animals to feed us, they don't have water. They're not going to be very healthy either. And if you don't have a healthy animal, you're not going to have healthy meat. It's not going to provide healthy quality for you as well. So water is super, super, super important. So, another stage is like, getting fresh access to water year-round, creeks, large ponds, digging wells, cisterns from rainwater that you're collecting and holding water. And of course, for an up level of your water, you can go back and check out the Kangen booth, because Erica has a way to help you ionize that water and actually turn it into like really good water with like amazing properties. But just knowing that, again, when you talk about water, there's different stages of it. And you really have to think about more than just having a backup supply if you want to talk about being self-sufficient in your life. How can you actually continuously provide yourself, your animals, your family with really good quality water all of the time? So we actually had issues when we first went off-grid. And we had this pretty decent pond, and we had this creek, and it had a lot of water, and we actually had 2 runoff creeks in the back. And when we bought it, like the water was so full because we bought it in winter when there was a lot of rain. And we didn't even think. We had like no idea in our mind that we were actually going to go through like a really, really severe drought, and we were going to run out of water. So we actually ran out of water the first year we lived there. And we had done everything we could to set up. Our pond sits at like the second level of our property. And then our garden, we actually put right below the pond so that we would have a way to gravity irrigate. So my husband, stuck a pipe into the pond, and now our garden gets irrigated from the pond water. We just have to turn a little handle, and then the water comes out. Well, it was all great until the pond had no more water in it. Or the water that was in the pond went below where he put the pipe, and we were like, oh. Like we didn't know, because it was our first year in the land, that we really probably should have focused on collecting all that rain that we had that winter when we bought it. If we would have known, we could have worked on collecting rainwater instead, but we were like, oh, we've got this big pond, and we'll just collect it there. And then we ran out of water, and we actually had to let half our crop go the first year, and ended up having to drive to some friends' houses and like borrowing water, and like filling it up in like 55-gallon drums and like driving it to our house. Like it was really like, can I borrow some water? I'm gonna come fill up like 55 gallons, and they're like, sure. But something that we like learned, like, and now we've actually, the pond is bigger, we're able to hold more, and we put in the rainwater collection system so we can deal with that. We just didn't know, right? So that's what I'm saying, like, it's all about the action that you're taking. We wouldn't have known unless we just did it. If we would have known, then we would have been prepared for it, but we weren't. So we had to learn through taking the action and just living through it and going through a really severe drought. And it had to suck for a little while before it got better. And now we know. So anyways, a lot of these things that we're talking about are all really important things that we want to consider. I'm really proud to say that like we can do and are doing a lot of these things, but we're not doing all of them. And that's okay, because as I mentioned earlier, it's community that it's all about. And some of the things that we can't do, I know that there are people here in our group that we meet up with once a month that we know that there are some of the things that they can come out and help us with that we can't necessarily do. We still want to learn and acquire all the skills that we possibly can, because I don't want to be depending on too many people, right? And I also want to be like an asset to my community, so that if I need to depend on them, I want them to know that they can depend on me too. And the more skills I have, and the more knowledge I have, and the more action I've taken in my own life, my own land, the more I can give back to my community in really big ways, and that feels really good. So I also wanted to talk about kind of what you were saying about your friend that's car broke down, and it's like, what happens in those types of situations if we're really trying to go for like a self-sufficient life? Like that really means that we're providing everything for ourselves. And I mentioned earlier that Ryan, my husband, likes to mill wood with our mill, right? And like that's something that he wants to make a lot of logs and stuff from wood from our property. But what would happen if he actually ended up getting hurt while he was milling wood? This is something that we've talked about when we talked about like really being self-sufficient. Like, we don't have the means to be able to like, there's a couple of things that we've done. We've taken some basic CPR classes. Like, I went through like this extra, and I learned how to like put an IV in so I could like give him fluids, and I like maybe stocked up on some fluids, and we, through our travels, we've like stocked up on like certain medications that we feel would be really important to have, but like not like an emergency situation. Like, I don't have the means to be able to take care of him. I would try really hard. And we just bought a medical kit from Brad's table outside. So if you guys have one over there, there's medical kits for sale, and that's really awesome. But really, like at the end of the day, like I wouldn't be able to do as much as I would need to do or want to be able to do for my family in a real, true emergency situation. And so those are just things that need to be considered when we're talking about really wanting to be like self-sufficient and self-reliant and really being able to take care of ourselves. Another thing is like, what if something breaks? What if I have like weatherproof boots that I like really need in the winter, like waterproof boots that I need to walk through and like I get a hole in them or the rubber cracks or whatever happens, like do I have the means to fix that? I don't, right? I can't make my own shoes, I can't make my own clothes, I can't make my own sweaters, I can't, but I know that there are people here that have the power or that have the abilities or have those skills to be able to do some of that stuff, and that's who I need to be able to connect with so that I can be like, oh wow, can you make me another, sweater because mine, whatever happened to it, something happened to it, right? I'm just picturing situations where I might need to rely on somebody else that might have a skill that I don't necessarily have. Not that I don't want to learn how to do that stuff, but I can't do all of it, right? I can't do all of it, and I can't do all of it really well without really, truly, like, leading to massive burnout. Trying to do all of the things all the time, that's what it led to me and my family. We were like, we're going to do it all, we're going to be fine, we're going to be self-sufficient. And then we were like a year in, and we're like, okay, I can't breathe. Can you breathe? I feel like we're dying over here. Because we were doing so much that we were just, like, starting to, like, completely burn out and realizing that, like, we just can't. We cannot do that, and we can't do it sustainably to be able to hold our energy through and like and still parent our kids and and be good for each other, even like our relationships were suffering and things like that. So what I want to end or leave you guys with is, could we learn to set a broken bone? Yes, sure, of course we could. We've actually talked about learning how to do that type of stuff. My husband's really into like prepping for stuff. He actually bought his like little suture kit so we could actually like learn how to sew up, like family Friday night where we're all like, okay, let's learn how to sew up this little fake skin that we can, in case we ever needed to do something like that. Like, I want to learn those skills, right? Like, but it's also really good to know that I have like friends that are nurses and doctors, even in this community that we have here, that might be able to help us if we needed something, an emergency situation like that. Again, about the clothing and shoes, like if I really wanted to, I could learn all that, and I do at some point, but I'm not there yet. I'm not making my own clothes. I'm not making my own shoes. Could we learn to make our own fuel if we ever run out? That's another big thing that we talk about all the time. Like all of our vehicles on our property are all diesel because we're like, well, if we ever get to the point where we can't go out and have access to gas, like we still want to be able to run some stuff. So we do have diesel where that may be something that we need to do, but we don't have that skill yet, right? So that's something that we want to work towards, but it's also really good to know that there's people out there that can do it. And if you guys have been to the Self-Reliance Festival in Nicole Sauce. Do you guys know about the Self-Reliance Festival? I know a few of you do. There was actually a guy there that was teaching you how to do that, which is really cool. So being around people and learning those skills from people like that is a really good step towards, learning some more self-reliant skills. So anyways, we can learn all this stuff. That's like the whole point is that we can and we will eventually go down that path of learning all the stuff that we need to do and learn, but we haven't learned it yet. So we realize that we're really, really, really far from actually being self-sufficient. And that's really where this is going to come to. The majority of people in the world are actually never going to be 100% self-sufficient. So, the more we do, the more we try to do, and we try to do it all, the thinner that we're going to spread ourselves out. And that, like I said, leads to massive burnout, which is never going to be good when you're trying to live your day-to-day life, and also if you're ever trying to survive. So what's the solution? Well, I believe it's probably best to focus on what you have, right? So like I said, I don't think it's not about like, oh, you shouldn't have to learn that, or you shouldn't have to do that because so-and-so does it. No, we still need to learn things. We still should get as many skills as we can. But find others who are doing the same thing, that are wanting to learn more skills, but find ones that are learning other ones than you, so that you know that you're learning this and he's learning that, and you guys can connect, right? And you guys can depend on each other a little bit. And then build relationships with people. And don't wait until you need something that somebody has, right? Like, don't wait until, Bradley talked about raw milk earlier today. Like, don't wait until, like, you can't get milk from the grocery store to start trying to buy it from Brad and support his operation. Because guess what? When no one can get milk from the grocery store, they're all going to be going to Bradley. You already want to be one of those people that have already been supporting him. You've already had a relationship with him, so that he's going to work hard towards supporting you, just like you've supported him over these years. Don't wait until, like, the need comes. Like, start supporting the people right now and building those relationships with the people right now. So that, and that's just supporting the community that we have here, and that's really, really, really important, because the more resources that our community has, the more good that we can all do in the world, because we're all here, we all think differently, It's like, I love what Kenton said about his community, everybody wanting to help each other. We all here, like, we might not dress the same, we might not all live within, like, the same area, like, we might all have different beliefs and, don't have the same exact beliefs or whatever, but, like, we all have the same mission. We're all trying to build a parallel society. We're all trying to operate outside of the system. And that's all that we really need, is the conviction can be the same as Kenton's community, that we're all here to help each other out. And that's all that's really important, is that we get to do that for each other. So it's not too hard to get plugged in. Start learning the skills. Like I said, become an asset to yourself and to your community, so they can depend on you as much as you will depend on them. And just because most likely none of us here will ever be 100% self-reliant doesn't mean that we shouldn't be equipping ourselves with as much knowledge and as many skills as we can, because we know that the world's a crazy place. That's not coming from a place of fear. I'm not here to promote fear-mongering. It's not about that. It's actually quite the opposite, because those who are prepared, we aren't scared, right? There's no fear for those who are prepared. We're ready for, like, whatever is going to come our way. So that's your call to action, to get prepared, get equipped. Try to remember that all of this stuff takes time, so don't wait to get started. Lots of mistakes are going to happen along the way, lots of failing forward. That's how you learn. And if you wait to start, you will only prolong the time it takes for you to acquire some of the necessary skills for some of the deeper levels that we talked about in full self-sufficiency. So, that's all I got.